Silver is money. It's not, when you buy silver, you're not buying a fishing rod or a car. You're exchanging an inferior form of currency, fiat paper, which is not backed by anything except some trust, for real money that's been there for thousands of years, has never gone to zero, unlike all paper has, and is going to be there to be an insurance policy and very possibly a big profit center.
Hey everyone, this is Elijah K. Johnson with the Miles Franklin Market Update. And with us today is David Smith, the Senior Analyst at the Morgan Report. He's an expert in mining exploration and metals mining. David, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's really a pleasure to be here. How are you doing?
Doing great. It's been a crazy week, and I wanted to get your perspective on this, especially when it has to do with the mining sector. We saw this, Reddit phenomenon where, people were going after GameStop and bidding the price up and other stocks, and then it went into silver. And it wasn't just physical silver. It was also the mining stocks that people were bidding up. So how do you think this hashtag SilverSqueeze impacted the mining sector?
Well, it had a pretty big impact. It was short-lived, and now the people are paying for it on the downside because what they did, one of the stocks they targeted, which is one I've held for a long time, and I believe to be one of the best quality ones in the sector, one of the relatively few primary silver miners in the world, First Majestic. And it's always had a lot of liquidity on the New York Stock Exchange, and it has a very high beta to the price of silver. In other words, when silver moves, First Majestic moves in whichever direction is going on. And so there was apparently a lot of buying of First Majestic on the Robinhood account. And in the case of GameStop, there's no justification for it to be trading higher than it was because it's a brick and mortar, has been really in regards to what's going on online. But First Majestic is a legitimate, absolutely stellar producer of silver in Mexico. And they have some of the best operators and management in the world, really. So they drove this stock up $5 or $6. It was really funny watching it. And the volume was, I think 2 days ago, it was 60 million shares. It normally trades 15 to 20 million. So, and then the powers that be came in the next night and wrote, they started short selling the market, and the same thing with First Majestic. And the price, the last time I looked, it was about $16 or $15. It had been about 24. So, but what was fascinating to me was looking at, I figured this would happen. I have other stocks too, and I can mention some names if you want, but they're also producers or soon to be producers. And I thought when they couldn't get into First Majestic, they would fill out into these other stocks, which they did. And I saw price movements with them that were beyond what you normally would expect for what's been going on in the last few weeks. They're high quality stocks, but they moved 2 or 3x from what you would expect. And then when things kind of fell out of bed the last couple of days, they also dropped precipitously too. But the silver story is much bigger than what's going on. This is just a surprising interlude. You can call it a black swan if you want. And I think it has massive significance in terms of the change in the way people are going to view the way the street works and the way the regulators don't regulate. And people see how it really works a little bit more with the paper trading, where you're trading shares that don't exist. It wasn't just in the paper market and the COMEX. And then also they're seeing the silver story, and they're seeing what you and I and Andy and David Morgan and many other people, Doug Casey, Rick Rule, they've all told people for years that silver is money. It's not, when you buy silver, you're not buying a fishing rod or a car. You're exchanging an inferior form of currency, fiat paper, which is not backed by anything except some trust, for real money that's been there for thousands of years, has never gone to zero, unlike all paper has, and is going to be there to be an insurance policy and very possibly a big profit center.
Now, with respect to the ways that this may have fundamentally changed the markets, I mean, we saw this little blip, right? We saw silver, the biggest one, a huge move in silver, 10%. And as you mentioned, in the mining stocks, there was big moves, but now it is back to kind of where it was before. So can you kind of expand on, the price seems to not have been impacted that much in this SilverSqueeze thing, but can you expand on, how have things really changed fundamentally because of this occurrence here?
I think they absolutely have changed fundamentally. And you know this as well as I do. For the last year or two, whenever the silver price has been knocked down, people that have margin get knocked out. And like David Morgan says, this market will either wear you out or scare you out. But if their positions aren't too big, they stay in. But people have been buying more physical silver when the price drops, and they buy more physical silver when the price rises. So this, for the people that are trying to promote this idea that silver should be priced like this, it's the worst of both worlds for them. And I think these events of the last few days have put out, for anyone that's willing to just look a little bit below the surface, that it's changing the narrative. And also, as you know, physical silver is almost unobtainable across the country, even in small amounts. And if you can find some, there are long lead times, and the premium has gone up. And it's people have it's been like a vacuum cleaner to suck it all up. And I've heard stories of people in line out of, mining, metal stores for hours before they open. And you're going to see more of this. But the thing now, it's a quiet that is what you might say in a movie I used to watch when the good guys were waiting for the bad guys to attack them at night. The guy says, it's really quiet out here. And the other one says, maybe a little too quiet. And so I think that's what we should consider, is that each of these hammer blows that are going to start coming with the tremendous reasons that silver should and will go many times higher, probably up well into 3 digits going forward here, are still in play, and people are going to be more quick to go for that physical when they can find it every time the price jumps. And when it drops, they're going to be real quick to do the same thing, and they're going to hang on. I've talked to people that said, and I remember Andy talking about this a few weeks ago, and this is before all this got going. I think he said 1 3 or 4 day period there were several hundred buys and like one sale or no sales. I mean, people are not moving back in to take a profit here. And I think when we see $35, $40 silver, you're going to see some silver come back, but that's just going to be a speed bump on the way once that's absorbed by the market, and it will be. We'll see much, much higher prices, and those people that sold their silver will come to be known as spectators rather than speculators.
And you mentioned about like manipulation of the silver market. And if anybody is interested in learning more about that, kind of more about the debate actually that is out there, they can actually just click right here in the upper left hand corner, or look in the description for that link to kind of get, all perspectives on that topic. But I wanted to get your perspective, because you mentioned how kind of the banks are, short the market and all of that. The kind of counter argument to that is that the banks are essentially just hedging other positions. They have clients that hold silver, but then they're hedging that. And all you can actually see in the futures market is the hedge, just the short position. So what is your response to that? Are the banks actually have a net short position, or is it just the way that we view what is publicly available?
I believe they have a net short position, and especially when futures traders sell thousands of contracts, they're not backed by anything, and they have very low margin. They can have up to 20 times their money, 20x more than they have money to do this, and they hit it just at certain times on the charts to paint the chart, so to speak. And so that's not good. And the big banks, there are a lot of banks that hedge silver that they're not doing any business for their clients. They're actually market speculators on the short side. So the thing too is that, if you and I were having this conversation even 5 years ago, let alone 10 or 15, and this has been going on for, increasingly for 25, 30 years, there would be fewer options now to deal with this from the standpoint of the public involvement than there was even in 1980, which very small percentage of the public was involved in that. There were the Hunt brothers and a couple of Arabs, that were trying to corner the market. But now it's more diffused. There are more legitimate metal sellers, such as yourself, out there that have product for sale, that they have transparency of prices. They offer storage. They offer fair, markups in relationship to the silver that's out there and the demand. And, it's just more affordable. And the story of the silver story is more available than ever before. And now with the blockchain enabled altcoins, there are actually vehicles that two of which I'm very familiar with, one of which I'm heavily involved with. But the first one is the Sprott Vault Chain Gold and Silver, where they actually store silver and they can actually deal with a silver or gold producer and take that metal from the ground into, say, someplace at the Royal Canadian Mint, all on the blockchain, and eliminate 7 or 8 parties in the middle, and do it, safer and more inexpensively than the old way that had been done. And then there's also the electronic silver, the one that David Morgan and I have been associated with for quite a bit, the Lode Cryptographic Silver Project, where the AGX coins and the AUX coins, backed respectively by a gram of silver and a gram of gold, are out there, and they're getting wide dissemination, and they're getting bigger approval slots and things like this. So a person now can store their metal. They can store it with Miles Franklin in a vault, a secure vault. I think it's the Brinks. Is that right? What you guys use?
That's true. Yeah.
And they can store the physical there, or they can purchase. They can send their metal in or purchase the metal through the Lode Cryptographic Silver Project and store it as a digital coin on the blockchain with an immutable record of it. And that silver is stored in a vault that's just as secure as the ones you use. So those are opportunities and options that didn't exist before. And I think that as these occurrences come up and people are now aware of how the game is played, they're going to be part and parcel of changing those rules. You and I have the capability to change the rules of how it's being played, and whether it's the Redditors, the millennials, or whether it's regular people like us buying in the metals. And I still believe, I think buying mining stocks is a way to do that. But I think the best way to do it is simply to buy physical silver, hold in your hand, stored in a hole in the ground, stored in the bank vault, which is not quite the best way to do it, but stored in one of the vaults that you guys have rather than a safety deposit box, which is what I was referring to earlier. That's not the best place. But, in several locations, and maybe have some at home and don't mention it to anybody. And you will have in your hand something immutable. It'll never go to zero. It's an industrial metal, which is going to be more and more used, and less of it's being mined. We're in the 4th year of the deficit for metal. The grade is decreasing. Massive new deposits are far and few between. So all the things augur toward a palladium-like experience for silver, which will take place, and it could very well get underway mid-year in this year or later in the year, but it's coming. And it's a question, as Rick Rule says about some of his investments, it's not a question of if, but rather when.
That's a really good point. And you mentioned how precious metals are really immutable in a sense that they're always going to have value. And that's a really important thing, I think, that for viewers to understand. Whatever happens to this, SilverSqueeze or whatever, fundamentally has the reason, if you're, invested in precious metals, has the reason to invest in precious metals changed? And my argument would be no, it stays the same as it was before.
Yeah, and it's even more powerful. And in one way, I think it has changed because globally, countries are working to eliminate cash payments for things and substitute digital payment where they would know every time you buy a roll of toilet paper what brand it was. You'd have no privacy whatsoever. And the great gift of precious metals is privacy. You can keep it and have it and turn it back in, and you don't have to go through a bunch of entities to do that. And so that's a very powerful motivator as well. So I think, there's another thing too. I've seen this many times. I've seen it with gold and I've seen it with silver. Someone who's never held a gold coin in their hand, when you put that in their hand, they automatically smile. They can't help it. And I've talked to grizzled prospectors and company owners that are centimillionaires, and that mine gold and silver. And when they have that metal in their hand, there's a certain feeling of security and levity there that nothing else can do. Give them a couple $100 bills, they're happy about that, but it's not the same thing. And take a silver coin and rub it between your thumb and forefingers, and it's kind of slippery, and see the little glint. And, before COVID, I traveled a lot in South America looking at mines and mining stories. And I ran into a lot of people in the process, whether somebody working there. There was one place where one of the miners was 90 some years old, and he's performing something valuable there, but they're keeping there because he was one of the earliest founders of that mill. And I've been in grocery stores and in taxi cabs and at the airport and in a restaurant, and I carry a handful of 1 ounce silver bullion coins with me, and they're shiny, and I'll give one to some of these people sometime. And some of these people they're obviously very wealthy, but it doesn't matter. They still appreciate it, And I'll go, "Dice de once de plata pura por usted, 1/10 of an ounce of pure silver for you." And I've never had anybody refuse it. It's really something special.
I think that's definitely true. It is something definitely different. We have this sense that, precious metals are definitely different than paper money. And maybe that comes from that it is really the gold and silver are only the only things that really have the property of being money. They're the only things that have actually worked as money over 6,000 years. Everything else fails.
All the paper currencies that have ever been created, clear back from when the Chinese got started on it, have all gone to zero. And by definition, the dollars in our pocket, whether they're Canadian or U.S., they've already gone to zero in terms of their purchasing power just from the 1960s, let alone going back to when the Federal Reserve was created. So, the U.S. dollar today has about a 2 cents or less purchasing power from what it did in 1913. And it has lost 80% of that since about the 1960s. And I think it's lost 20% since 2000. So people think, I got more dollars, but ask yourself how much it buys. And you have a government that has stated, we will deteriorate the value and purchasing power that you have every year. We want at least 2% inflation. That means to your dollar is worth 98 cents next year. It's really worth 95 or 90 because the stated rate of inflation is vastly under the reality. If you look at housing prices, tell me there's no inflation. A 2x4 that would have cost me $2.50 last year now costs $12.50. I think something's going on here. Food is going up big time, and food is one of the biggest advanced determiners of that inflation is getting underway. And I believe that well before this year is out, inflation is going to be a headline event across the country. And if we're not careful, we're going to end up with an inflation level in a few years that's going to make what happened in 1979 and 80 look like child's play. And maybe even something as bad as what's taking place in Venezuela or in Argentina, where they've got 50 to 75% inflation now. When I started going down there to look at mines with, at David Morgan's behest, it was 3 pesos to the dollar. It's now about 80, and in fact, it's probably less than that. So, and that's a government issue. So it's probably 120 on the black market. What they call the blue market. They call them los obolitos, I think it is, the wavering like little trees. They stand out in the street and they exchange pesos for U.S. dollars or occasionally for metal. And so a small amount, and that's another thing. This is an asymmetric trade with what's going on. This has been building up. You don't need to mortgage your home to buy silver or gold. Buy a few tubes of it. I guess a round now it's cost what, maybe $28 to $30, or if it's a American Silver Eagle, it might be $35. But buy a tube of those, or buy a 10-ounce bar or whatever. And if we see where I think we're going to go over the next few years, we're going to see 3-digit silver, and that bar and that tube is going to be worth a whole lot more than you paid for it. And you stick it in a drawer and take it out and look at it once in a while and smile.
Yeah, and I think it's good to remember that, the fundamental reason to invest in precious metals is to protect your wealth, right? But in the case of inflation and in the time of crisis, sometimes the price of precious metals can actually rise faster than the inflation, so the value is actually increasing. With respect to kind of the gold silver ratio. We often see when gold and silver moves faster and the ratio falls. Do you see that happening in the near future?
I do. In fact, it's already started to happen. You know, if you're a chartist, you look at some formation that's gone on for a long time, whether it's an uptrend or a downtrend, and you draw a line across the peaks or the bottoms. And when that price breaks out in a different direction from where it's been, that can be a very important early signature that something has changed. And I saw just a few days ago, that's the first time I've seen it, I think, there was a downtrend chart of the gold-silver ratio. And I believe it's been declining since at least 2000, maybe longer. So in effect, gold was becoming more worthwhile per ounce than X amount of ounces of silver. And that has now broken out to the upside. So silver is gaining value and holding value on a relationship basis more so than gold. And it's substantially broken out. And that indicates to me there's a saying, the bigger the base, the greater the upside case. So that big base that's been going on for anywhere from 8 to 12 or 15 years is now seems to be reversing in favor of silver. And I think that presages a lengthy, profound, and sustained change in the relationship of X amounts of silver ounces in the relationship to gold than we've seen before. And that's a big deal. And like you say, it's insurance first, profit second. And here's another thing that I think people don't think about, and I don't think about it too often, but a lot of the money that people put into silver, they would have frittered away doing something else if they didn't. And they're putting it into an immutable form of money when they do, and it's not gone. It's still there. They can always, sell it back in to buy something with it. But if they've spent it on something that's decreased in value, some type of a material thing or whatever, that's gone. Silver is not. It remains there with you, and you are the only claim to it. You hold it in your hand. Nobody else has claim to that but you.
All right. Well, David Smith, thank you so much for joining us today. Yeah, and everyone, please comment below your perspective on the topics we discussed today. The silver squeeze, is it still going on? What kind of an impact has it had, maybe fundamentally, in the markets? Just kind of comment below. And David Smith, thank you so much for your time today. Where can people find you online if they'd like to learn more?
It's my pleasure to be here today. I really enjoy talking with you. And I write for the Morgan Report just about every month, so go to themorganreport.com. I do a monthly, which I've done for 6 or 7 years, essay for Money Metals in Idaho. And I also write by invitation, and I'm not paid for it, but I really enjoy doing it, several essays a year for the Prospector News. And I've got one in there in the current January, February issue. And if somebody wants a copy of one or more of those essays I've written for the Prospector News, they can write to support@themorganreport.com, and we'd be happy to send them free a PDF of whatever issue that they'd like to have of an essay, a breakout essay for that.
David Smith, once again, thank you so much for your time, and God bless.
It's been a pleasure to be here, and thank you as well. Take care.